guys, it's Chris with Microsoft here with another exciting episode of the Performance series. In the last episode we've been talking about how to use Perfmon in the interface and getting data collector sets started and interpreting counters, or at least loading them. We'll talk about performance troubleshooting from an interpretation standpoint a little bit later, but that's where we kind of were, where I left you off. In this video we're going to be continuing that trend just a little bit and talking about what we can do with these things once we have them. But one thing that I did want to further elaborate on is something I started to touch on, and that is the impact of once you click start on this thing. A lot of times we'll get the question about Perfmon and what is the impact. It's actually not that big on modern systems. A lot of people are kind of scared of Perfmon because we didn't have quite as powerful systems as we used to. We have. Let me strike that and try it again. Let's say we don't have as low powered of systems as we once upon a time used to have. Think back NT4 days. Yes, Perfmon has actually been around that long. Through many evolutionary cycles, it's a bit of a different animal, but overall it's still just taking stuff that Windows is generating and putting in a log. First off, all the counters I just looked at, these don't just start getting created because I decided to put them in Perfmon. Windows does this stuff all the time. It's just part of how Windows works. Windows already has information about how long packets of data are taking to go across a network or across your disk subsystem to get to a drive and get an acknowledgement back. All that stuff's there. You're just throwing it in a log file, right? And so pulling that out and putting into the log file is usually about 1% of your overall utilization. I don't mean processor utilization. I mean overall. Like overall system resources, you're talking about 1% or less of usage. So other things that go with that are like about on these BLG files as they get created, which we put that into C and we put it into perflogs admin, the default. Go ahead and get permissions to read into that directory. Yes, and then name, because we called it name, and then this first one, and yes, you have to UAC prompt every one of them. This is a bit of a hard to read because Perfmon isn't even going to bother writing to the disk all the time. It's kind of got a lazy writer flush every once in a while. It'll come dump some stuff in here, but if the disk's busy, it won't even bother doing that. It'll just kind of keep it in system cache for a little while, and then dump out to here every little bit. But about 125 megabytes of RAM gets used with a whole lot of counters in Perfmon. So if you can't afford 125 megabytes of extra RAM being used, you might consider what you're going to be running on this thing. It writes in these 256K chunks at a time, but not always, right? As it gathers some data and it needs to flush to the disk, if the disk has the availability, it does that at that point. You can see I'm refreshing. It's still running. It's just not actually doing anything to the log. So there's some tips to keeping the thing from just going completely crazy. For instance, we don't want to come in here and go into the let me find it here, STHRE thread. Come on, where's the thread? So if we did thread all instances and add that in, that's thread star.star. This would get absolutely crazy insane. It's going to take up a lot of resources. The disk's going to fill up a lot faster, and it's not something you're going to commonly need. So you would only load this in if you had a reason to do so. So avoid that one. Use the counters instead of just the whole object. In the previous episode, we talked about how you can go through and just select. System's not a good option here, so let's go back up here to processor. We would not just go through and pick processor star. We might go grab, like we did in our example, and go grab just a few of these little counters and throw those in and star, right? So we don't want to do counters we don't even understand or think would be relevant for us for troubleshooting. Your first instance when you're starting to use Perfmon is you might think, well, I want to throw everything in there because I don't know what I might need, and if I don't have it, well then darn it, I'm going to have to work with this whole data collecting after the fact. That's the worst thing. That's why we want to do black box counters, and I'll explain once again in an upcoming episode on how to create a black box counter. You don't want to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, find out one of your servers had a problem overnight, and then say, well, okay, I guess we need to start collecting data. It would be much nicer just have the data and look at it then, right? That's why Perfmon's awesome. That's why black boxes are awesome. You can just say, okay, boss, I will check into that, and not, okay, boss, well, I guess I need to go and start looking to see what kind of tools we might need to load on that and see if we can catch the problem if it ever happens again. Bosses don't like to hear that. Bosses like to hear, yes, sir, I'm going to go find out what happened, and I'll get back to you as soon as I've got some information. And likewise, you might think, well, if I just throw everything in here and capture everything, well, that, then I know I've got everything I need. Try to avoid that. Just use the counters that you know will be helpful to you. So that's another little bit of advice. Avoid, as we discussed before, doing sample intervals of 1 second. There's a time and a place for that, right? There's a time you might actually need a 1 second sample interval, but not often, right? There's just not too many times where you need less than 5 seconds. So that's another one. Normally, if you load the counters that we discuss in this session, and you do like a 15-second sample interval, not the 5 one that I used in the example earlier, but the one I was talking about in the previous episode, where usually 15 seconds gets you where you need to be. In most cases, you're talking about 200 megabytes a day, right? So if you're running a black box version of one of these Perfmon counters, then you've got plenty of data that you can go back over. So that's just a quick little break in talking about the impact of data collection. It's not that big a deal. So don't be scared of Perfmon. So the other thing we need to cover is all the other little bits, boxes, knobs, and buttons that are inside of the data collector and the data collector set. So there's the data collector that actually has just the things that we looked at already, right? It's got all of your actual performance counters, and it's got the sample interval. The other things that we didn't have was maximum samples, which there's better ways to stop a data collector set than this. So we'll kind of skip over that. This is another one that is a bit of a confusing things for people. The binary log is the one to use. Okay, there's a lot of other cool looking stuff in here, but don't use this for troubleshooting. First off, your comma separated and your tab separated, even though they're smaller, substantially smaller, will cause you to miss stuff. You will miss new processes when they're started that kick up on a box. If they aren't there when the actual thing starts, the CSV file's already been built and it's already got all the processes in there, and if a new process kicks up, it's the same as not using star in the data collector that we talked about yesterday. So don't use comma separated, don't use tab separated. If you really want to save space, you can actually use relog.exe to turn binary BLGs into comma separated values and cut the space down at that point, but always use binary. You might also be tempted to use SQL. That's fine, but not for troubleshooting, because again, you don't want to be sending stuff across a network to some SQL server any more than you want to be trying to gather this from one perfmon to another perfmon across the network, because when the thing locks up and has problems, your perfmon that's logging local will still be logging local in most cases, whereas you could very easily miss important pieces if you're going across the log. So always use the binary format, right? File, this is easy. What's the name? So the file name format gives you some neat little things where you can have it start up and give hours and minutes and days and stuff appended to it. And this is just kind of a neat little guide that you can use. Like, check that, or go ahead and put that out there for me. So it's just basically a format picker. That way, if you want to have these tagged with dates and times and stuff like that, and even tagged with a computer name if you want. And it'll kind of show you at the bottom what it's going to look like. So you can see it's going to show the data collector for the machine name, and then O1 May BLG. Right? So these are certainly interesting options. We already talked about the circular. That causes you to go ahead and throw out the old stuff. Append means we're going to start and stop this log several times, and I just want you to keep throwing it into the same log. So a little bit different than the circular, which is going to get gutted. If you try to use a circular log and append to it, what it does is it zeroes out the log and starts over if you stop your data collector and start it back over again. So you don't, two different schools of thought there, can't combine the two together. Overwrite just means always gut it and start over. And then at the bottom, this is just giving you an idea of what it is that it's going to look like with the modifications that you make above it. Right? So then we go on here to the properties for the data collector. So we've got your name, and you can give it a description, and you could even have keywords if that becomes important to you. The directory is just, hey, where are we going to save this thing? So the other one had the log file. This is important because it is possible to have a data collector with a lot of different data collector sets. The different performance counter sets and even different kinds of collectors could be mixed together. Well, this is where they're all going to live, and then the file name piece, that's why that's in a separate part of this, right? So these are very different property sheet sets. This guy will tell you the file name. The data collector will tell you where it goes, right? And some similar pieces here with the directory would create a subdirectory, and as you can see, it's got years, months, days by default in here, and it's already prefixing the computer name. So security, well, that's obvious, just how we're going to line security up on this thing. Schedule's interesting. You can actually schedule this thing to do capture at a certain time. So if you know the problem you're going to have is actually going to be at like 9 o'clock tonight, start it up at 8:30 and let it run until however long you think you need to run it to, because you can put a schedule to start and stop this using Task Scheduler. So the other thing that you could do here is add, not just the time, but you could go modify that. So this gets a little bit outside of Perfmon itself, but let's say that I wanted this thing to get started up at, I don't know, 6 p.m. or something like that, and then come in here and click OK. And what you see is it told me I can't make changes to it while it's running. Well, that's fine, because what am I looking for here? I'm looking for Task Scheduler. Oh, wait. Let's use the search function like good little boys. Why is that not typing? Typing! Stop it with the... There we go. Task. It should show me Task Scheduler. Maybe? Possibly? Beautiful. Okay. So for this, we're going to go out to Task Scheduler. And we're going to go in, and I'll show you the path to this thing. It's under the PLA, and it obviously is a very slow VM today. It's kind of an underpowered VM on a kind of underpowered laptop to begin with. So anyway, we'll expand out here and go, if you didn't catch that, sorry, I forget not to clickety-click and not talk about what I'm doing. Task Scheduler Library, Microsoft Windows. We'll come down here into PLA and we'll expand this out. And you'll see that we've got this guy called name. Now remember, I specifically called our data collector set name so that we could identify it fairly easily. Our little name task scheduler, we'll notice, was actually put into task scheduler and given its own little trigger. If you remember, that trigger was weekly at 6 p.m. I could just blow that away and put something a whole lot more interesting in here, such as come on, new. Not responding. Boy, we have ticked this thing off. And there we go. Change it to at startup. So that's a hint on how we're going to create a black box. There's a few more things I want to add to this discussion because there's some very advanced things that we can do with black boxes, and we'll cover that later. But that's the start condition. And we'll go back in there real quick. So schedule, rather, not start condition. Okay, so stop condition we talked about already. Maximum size, obviously you could also do a number of seconds, right? We could do minutes, hours, days. Not too often that I've found myself needing to do this at all. You can have an overall duration for all the data collector sets, and stop when all the data collectors are finished. Now, why does that mean any sense at all? Well, you might have, once again, other data collectors in this. You might be doing a system trace, for instance. So you could have a scheduled task kick off after the set stops. So I can't think of a single thing that you would actually do. Maybe you have a scheduled task that writes an event into the event viewer and SCOM picks it up and sends you an email alert. I don't know, but there you go. So anyhow, that's all the pieces and parts to a data collector site. Pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of remembering, this isn't Windows XP where it was all in one place. It's separated out. But that's most of what you get with a data collector set. So you might be thinking here, hey, that was kind of a lot of work. Do I really have to do this on every single one of my systems that I want this to happen? To be running this, because maybe I've got 50 different servers. I'm trying to track a problem on a bank of web servers or something like that. Or maybe it's just that, once again, the non-IT guy who just is really good at computers and gets called by friends and family all the time. How is it that I have to walk through this with everybody? What if I miss a counter? How do I make sure that doesn't happen? Well, it's actually pretty easy. You can make yourself a template once you have it the way you like it, and just right-click this thing, save template, stick it out on the desktop or something like that, and call it, my fave. We call it my, apparently, because I hit enter. So anyway, we got a data collector set called my, and that's awesome. It's actually an XML site. Even though it looks like a notepad document, it's an XML file that gets generated. And you can use the XML file to import this back in. And it's real simple. You just go back to your data collector sets, say new data collector sets. We'll call it yours, I guess, since the last one was called my. Create from a template this time. And we're going to be doing performance, browse, desktop, my, next, and finish. So now we got one called yours that was built from my, and you'll notice that, hey, we've got some fairly cool stuff here, like all our counters made it, the sample interval made it, the fact that it's a circular log made it, the other stuff that we set up in here for the stop condition, everything's here except for the name. So it's real super easy to make yourself a nice little template that you can use to export your stuff out of here and then import this back into other systems. And there's even some other easy ways to do it than that, such as from the command prompt. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to use a little guy called Logman, but first we're going to make that XML file a little bit easier to use. So we're going to notepad pad, what do we call it? Yours? No, we called it my.xml. My XML. So this looks like a typical XML thing, right? There's some really good gold nuggets in here, like this right here. So does that seem familiar? See how it's got the counter path exactly the way you'd want it? All right, so this is a this is a counter. This is a counter display name. These are tags for the XML, right? Well, all this stuff that we're going to need in this next part is actually going to be the counters we want to load so that we can use the command line to actually manage Perfmon. So the way this works, I'm going to go Control and Shift and Home, and then I'm going to delete, and I'm going to hit delete again. And then I'm going to come down here to the counter display name, the first one line above it, just my counters. That's all I care about. I'm going to hit this very end of this line right here, and I'm going to go Control Shift End. And I'm going to delete that. Now I've got almost exactly what I need. So we're going to go to the top line, Shift, Home, Control C for copy, Control H for copy and replace, Control V for paste, and then I'm going to replace all, and blah, it just killed all those. And now I'm going to come through and I'm going to get rid of this and replace all. And there we got a nice handy text file full of all my favorite counters. Now what do I do with this? Alright, so I'm going to just save this as a text file now, and we'll put it on the desktop, and we're going to call this counters.txt. And now what we have is a text file full of counters. So what can we do with that, Chris? You might be asking me. Okay, so what we do is this neat little tool. I'm going to go ahead and maximize that, called Logman. So if I type Logman all by itself, you'd think you'd get a help file. Actually, what you're going to get is the status of the counter sets running on this server. I could also Logman, and then actually, what is the host name here? Okay, so if I were to do Logman and then -s for system, I could do Davis-81-VM, and it'll do the same thing. Now, the piece that's important there is I could do -s to other computers in my domain. This computer only is sitting in a work group, and it doesn't actually exist in another domain, but you would be able to just -s and see the status. Now we can see that there is one data collector set named name. If you remember, we called it name just to be funny, I guess. And then we got it running right up and right now. There's a ton of stuff you can do with Logman. I mean, a ton. If I do /?, there's all the stuff you can do with it. So read that real fast, and then yeah, no, I'm kidding. So ton of things we can do, but the most important one for this part of the lesson is going to be Logman create counter. We'll call this number 2. Couple of important switches. We're going to do SI, sample interval, and we're going to do OO, do a 15-second sample interval on this particular one. What else do we want to do? It's really the most important stuff right there. Oh, we could do max 2048. So the other one we did 2 gigs. So let's do 1024. So 1 gig, and then we can do the F is the file type. So I told you that binary was the right one to use. You can actually do that here in Logman 2 with binCirc. Binary circular. So you actually have to designate that if you're going to do what I'm about to do, which is put, as you can probably already tell, I have done a max of 1024, so I've got a stop condition, meaning I can do a circular log. You don't have to do the -F if you are not going to need to change it from just a standard binary. It does that by default. It does a lot of these things by default. You could literally do a Logman create counter and then give it a name and hit enter, and it creates one. It wouldn't have any counters in it. It wouldn't have any any of the other little things we put here. But just with that minimal amount of information, you can create a counter set from the command line. And okay, so the biggest piece here is, where do we get our counters? So we're going to do a counter file -cf, and then we're gonna pipe in that what did we call it again? Dadgummit. Minimize. My.txt. Yay. No, we called it counters.txt. Yes. See, we were a little more intuitive that time. You tab to complete counters.txt. We go bang. We can even do Logman start. Counter number 2. Oh, not counter, sorry. Logman start, you don't have to put counter. Logman start number 2. And now if we, oh. What in the world? Let's type Logman and see what we've got. I misspelled it, and it was trying to tell me, help me, you're, well, okay. Let's do that again, and we'll say Logman start. For a second there, I was thinking, did they make this case sensitive? NUMER2. So we're going to call this number 2. Logman start number 2. Logman again, and it'll show me. You saw up here we were stopped, and now we're running. Right. So a lot of things you can do. I could have done the exact same thing with a -S to another system, and I could have started this even though the counter set's on this one. Doesn't matter. I can fire that off to another system or multiple systems across the network using the handy-dandy Logman utility for managing our data collector sets. So let's prove it. Come back over here. You can see that it's already updated. It's showing number 2. It's up, it's running, it's going, and it's got all of the little data collector pieces that we used. It's got a circular log format. It's got a stop condition of a gig, and voila, pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. So there are ways to do this automated relatively easily, honestly. And there's another way you could do this too, if you wanted it also to have the scheduled task, and we'll cover that a little more in the black box session. But the task scheduler that we had up earlier, it also has an export function and an import function. It's outside of the scope of really performance troubleshooting necessarily, but there is a way to export and import scheduled tasks. You can even create a scheduled task on a machine that has the remote server administration tools and group policy management console on it, and you could actually create that task through a group policy by creating a scheduled task by looking at the task that you already created on that box, and it'll take that and it'll push it out, because the scheduled task itself had, I don't know if it's easy to see this without exporting it, but we can take a look. Let's go back down to the PLA real quick, and actually it may not have the parts, so that I may have just lied to you guys. Oops, PLA. So if I were to export name and put it on the desktop, we'll call it task scheduler test. Look at it. I want to make sure I'm not telling you fibs here. So yeah, data collector set, status 1, duration, description. Let's turn on word wrap. Yeah, looky there. There's all my counters. Check it out. Right, so I don't have row set on this machine. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but you can see, wow, I could export this one scheduled task and import it on other boxes, or even better, I could go and take it once I'm exactly the way I want it, and I could go and use group policy to pull that sucker in and push it to all my machines, so that I've got an always running, always on startup task scheduler that creates these black boxes for you, which is great until the box reboots, because it overwrites the file. So as long as your problem that you're troubleshooting isn't that it's rebooting randomly and you're trying to catch the end, because it'll overwrite the log. But that's where we get into the more advanced section, and I will cover how to do that. It is just a bit more complicated than what we talked about, and during that part we'll try to get a DC stood up in this environment and use that to build a group policy, so you'll know what it looks like. So anyway, continuing on. Actually not continuing on. Come to think of it, we're probably at a good point to stop here, because really the next thing we need to do is actually load up a capture and talk about how to kind of manage the logs themselves after they're going. We don't really need that, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that and delete it. So I think that's where we'll pick up on the next episode here. And we'll go ahead and pull this one to close for lesson 2. So anyway, guys, this has been Chris with Microsoft, and as always, I really thank you for watching. If you did find anything about this useful or interesting, give me a quick like on the video. That really helps me out a ton, and it helps it to be visible to other people as well. Also, feel free to subscribe to my channel. My channel description, subscription button should be there if you haven't already subscribed. The way that helps you is that if I do upload a new video, you get a little notification that has happened. Also, my blog, it's at 9z.com. It's real super easy to remember. It's just the last number and the last letter.com. That's also got links to my Facebook, my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my TechNet blog. And yeah, so thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next episode.